I was standing at the church door, wearing my best navy blue dress, holding the gift I had chosen so lovingly for my first grandchild. That's when my own son stopped me and said that my faith as a Jehovah's Witness was not welcome at the child's baptism. "You embarrass our family." The words hit me like a physical blow, cutting through the warm aroma of fresh coffee that still lingered in our dining room. I felt my heart skip, then race, as I looked into my daughter-in-law's cold eyes. At 68, I thought I'd heard every hurtful thing a person could say, but those 4 words seemed to strip away decades of dignity in a single moment. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my cup, the delicate china making the smallest sound against the saucer. The sound felt deafening in the sudden silence. Sarah had always been beautiful, the kind of woman who commanded attention when she walked into a room. Blonde hair, perfectly styled, makeup flawless even at 9 in the morning, wearing one of those expensive blazers that screamed success. She was everything I'd never been: polished, assertive, completely comfortable in her own skin. When Michael first brought her home 5 years ago, I'd tried so hard to like her. I really had. But there was something in her eyes, even then, a kind of measuring look, like she was constantly evaluating whether people were worth her time. "Mom doesn't mean to cause problems," Michael said quickly, his voice strained. My youngest son, my baby, trying to smooth things over like he always did. He was sitting between us at the breakfast table, caught in the middle again, his broad shoulders tense under his blue button-down shirt. At 32, he still had that gentle nature that had made him such an easy child to raise. Too easy, maybe. He'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who hated conflict more than anything else in the world. "Doesn't mean to?" Sarah's laugh was sharp, brittle. "Michael, your mother deliberately scheduled her Bible study group to meet during Emma's birthday party. She knew it was our daughter's first birthday. She knew how important it was to me." Her voice was rising now, and I could see the familiar flush creeping up her neck. This was how all our conversations ended lately, with Sarah angry and me feeling like I was drowning in accusations I didn't fully understand. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell them that Brother Williams had specifically asked if Tuesday afternoons worked for everyone, that I'd checked my calendar 3 times before agreeing, that I honestly hadn't remembered about Emma's party until it was too late to change everything. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain that my memory wasn't what it used to be? How could I admit that sometimes the days blended together, that keeping track of everyone's schedules had become overwhelming? "Sarah, please." I finally found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. "I didn't realize." "You never realize." She cut me off, leaning forward across the table. "It's always something with your church activities. Always some meeting or study or gathering that's more important than your own family." The way she said church activities made it sound dirty somehow, like I was involved in something shameful instead of something sacred. Michael reached for my hand across the table. His palm was warm, slightly damp with nervous sweat. "Mom, maybe we could reschedule the study group? Just this once?" His brown eyes, so much like his father's had been, were pleading with me, always asking me to bend, to compromise, to be the one who gave in. And I had, so many times over the years. But there were some things I couldn't bend on, some things that mattered more than keeping peace. "The brothers and sisters are counting on me, honey." I squeezed his hand gently. "Mrs. Rodriguez is studying with us, and she's so close to understanding the truth. If I cancel now..." I trailed off, seeing the familiar frustration flash across Sarah's face. She didn't understand. She'd never understood what it meant to be responsible for someone's spiritual welfare, to know that your commitment could be the difference between someone finding salvation or remaining lost. "The truth." Sarah practically spat the words. "Your truth, you mean. Not everyone's truth, not our truth." She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound made me wince. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Michael. This is why your mother can't be around Emma unsupervised. She'll fill our daughter's head with all this nonsense about the end times and paradise and shunning people who don't believe exactly what she believes." The accusation hit me like a slap. "I would never," I started, but she was already walking toward the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "You already have," she called over her shoulder. Last week, Emma came home asking me why Grandma Ruth's friend stopped talking to her son. She wanted to know if Mommy was going to stop talking to Daddy if he didn't go to the special building with Grandma. Sarah turned around at the kitchen doorway, her face flushed with anger. "She's 3 years old, Ruth, 3. And you've already got her worried about families being torn apart because of religion." I felt the blood drain from my face. I remembered that conversation with Emma. Remembered trying to explain why Brother Martinez no longer spoke to his disfellowshipped son in terms a child might understand. I'd thought I was being gentle, age-appropriate. I'd never imagined she would carry that fear home with her, that my words would plant seeds of anxiety in her innocent mind. Michael was looking at me now with something that might have been disappointment. "Mom, is that true? Did you tell Emma about disfellowshipping?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, to explain that Emma had asked direct questions and I'd tried to answer honestly, but the words wouldn't come. How could I make them understand that hiding the truth from children wasn't protecting them, it was leaving them unprepared for reality? How could I explain that my faith demanded honesty, even when that honesty was uncomfortable? "She asked me why Tommy's daddy doesn't come to meetings anymore," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I tried to explain that sometimes people make choices that have consequences. I never meant to scare her. Sarah came back into the dining room, her expression hard. "But you did scare her. And that's the problem, Ruth. Your religion scares people. It tears families apart. It makes people choose between their faith and their children." She sat back down, but perched on the edge of her chair like she might flee at any moment. "I won't let you do that to Emma. I won't let you poison her mind with fear and judgment and conditional love." The words stung because there was truth in them, even if Sarah couldn't see the whole picture. Yes, our faith sometimes required difficult choices. Yes, sometimes families were divided when some members chose to follow Bible principles and others chose the world. But that wasn't poison, that was protection. That was love so deep it was willing to risk temporary pain for eternal salvation. "It's not conditional love," I said, finding my voice again. "It's love that cares more about eternal life than temporary comfort. Sarah, if you could just study with us, if you could just open your heart to the possibility that—" "No!" She slammed her hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "No, Ruth, I'm not going to study your literature. I'm not going to convert to your religion. I'm not going to pretend that your way is the only way, or that everyone else is doomed, or that families should be destroyed in the name of God." She was breathing hard now, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "And I'm not going to let you indoctrinate my daughter." The word indoctrinate felt like a knife twist. 47 years I'd been one of Jehovah's Witnesses. 47 years of service, of meetings, of field ministry, of studying and teaching and living by Bible principles. And my own daughter-in-law saw it as indoctrination, saw my deepest beliefs, my most sacred convictions, as something dangerous and toxic. Michael was silent, staring down at his hands folded on the table. I could see the conflict written across his face. Love for his wife, love for me, love for his daughter, all pulling him in different directions. This was what I'd feared most when he'd announced his engagement to Sarah. Not that she wasn't a good person. She was kind to neighbors, generous with charities, devoted to her work as a pediatric nurse. But she didn't share our faith, and I'd known, deep down, that this moment would come eventually. "Michael," I said softly, hoping to reach the little boy who used to sit beside me at meetings, who used to raise his hand to comment about Noah's Ark and David and Goliath. "Remember when you were baptized? Remember what you promised Jehovah? Remember how happy we all were?" My voice broke slightly on the last words, remembering that day 15 years ago when my youngest son had dedicated his life to God, when I'd thought our family was complete in the truth. He looked up at me then, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I remember, Mom. I remember all of it. The meetings, the assemblies, the field service every Saturday morning." He paused, swallowing hard. "I also remember feeling terrified every time there was a thunderstorm because I thought Armageddon was coming. I remember losing friends when their families left the organization. I remember watching Dad struggle with depression because he felt like he was never doing enough, never spiritual enough, never worthy enough. The words hit me like physical blows. My husband, my dear Robert, had struggled with feelings of inadequacy. It was true. He'd worked so hard to be a good example, to provide for the family while maintaining his spiritual responsibilities. The pressure had been enormous, especially during those years when money was tight and we were trying to raise 3 children on one income because I needed to be available for field service and meetings. "Your father was a good man," I whispered. "He was faithful until the end." "He was," Michael agreed, and I heard the pain in his voice. "But he was also exhausted, Mom. He was worn out from trying to be perfect, from carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. And when he got sick," Michael's voice trailed off, but I knew what he meant. When Robert had been diagnosed with cancer, some in the congregation had suggested that perhaps his illness was a sign that he needed to examine his heart, to pray more, to serve more, as if faith could cure disease, as if good people never suffered. Sarah reached over and took Michael's hand, a gesture that somehow felt like she was claiming him, pulling him away from me. "I'm not trying to take your son away from you, Ruth. I'm not trying to destroy your family, but I am trying to protect mine." Her voice was calmer now, but no less determined. "Emma deserves to grow up without fear, without judgment, without being told that her mother is going to die at Armageddon because she doesn't go to Kingdom Hall." I wanted to protest, to explain that it wasn't about judgment, but about love, about wanting everyone to have the opportunity for eternal life. But sitting there at my dining room table, looking at my son's pained expression and my daughter-in-law's fierce protectiveness, I felt suddenly very small and very tired. The weight of decades of faithful service, of raising children in the truth, of trying to be the perfect witness wife and mother, settled on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. "What do you want from me?" I asked finally, the question barely audible. Sarah leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "I want you to be Emma's grandmother. I want you to love her without conditions, without trying to convert her, without making her afraid that love depends on which church she attends or which books she reads." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I want you to respect that Michael and I are raising her our way, and that our way doesn't include your religion." The silence that followed felt endless. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Chen's dog barking, the distant sound of a lawnmower. Normal suburban sounds that seemed to belong to a different world than the one we were inhabiting at my dining room table. Normal sounds from the world I'd spent decades being separate from. The world I'd taught my children to be no part of. "And if I can't do that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Michael and Sarah exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations that married couples have. When Michael turned back to me, his face was full of sadness, but also resolve. "Then we'll have to limit Emma's time with you," he said quietly. "We'll have to protect her the way any parents would protect their child from influences they believe are harmful." The word harmful echoed in my head long after they'd left. Harmful. My faith, my life's work, my deepest convictions, harmful. I sat alone at the dining room table as the morning sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. The coffee had grown cold, but I didn't move to clear the cups. Instead, I stared at the empty chairs where my son and daughter-in-law had been sitting, trying to process what had just happened. How had it come to this? How had the faith that was supposed to unite families become the thing that was tearing mine apart? The phone call came at 11:30 that night, jolting me from the restless half-sleep I'd finally managed to fall into. My heart hammered as I fumbled for the receiver in the darkness, my mind immediately jumping to the worst possibilities. Late-night calls were never good news, especially not when your family was already fractured. "Mom?" It was Jennifer, my middle child, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite identify. "Are you awake?" "I am now, sweetheart." I sat up against my pillows, reaching for the bedside lamp. The sudden brightness made me squint. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" There was a pause, and I could hear voices in the background, muffled conversation that sounded urgent. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, okay? Don't interrupt. Don't try to argue with me. Just listen." My stomach dropped. Jennifer had been pulling away for months now, missing more and more meetings, making excuses about work and social obligations. I'd been praying for her, hoping it was just a phase, the kind of spiritual struggle that many young adults went through before recommitting to the truth. But something in her voice tonight told me this was different. "I've been meeting with David," she said, and I knew immediately she meant David Chen, the elder who'd been assigned to help with her spiritual concerns. "We've been talking about my doubts, about the questions I've been having. And Mom, I can't do this anymore." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the plastic. "Jennifer, honey, everyone has doubts sometimes. That's normal. That's why we study, why we pray, why we lean on the organization for guidance. Mom, you promised you'd listen." Her voice was firm, but not unkind. "I know this is hard for you to hear, but I've made my decision. I'm not going to meetings anymore. I'm not going out in field service. I'm done pretending to believe things that don't make sense to me anymore." I felt like I was falling, like the bed had disappeared beneath me, and I was tumbling through empty space. My daughter, my brilliant, beautiful daughter, who'd been such a good example to the younger ones in the congregation, was walking away from the truth, walking away from salvation, walking away from eternal life. "What about your students?" I managed to whisper. Jennifer taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, and she'd always been so good with children. "What about the example you set?" "The example I set should be about being honest, Mom, about being true to myself, about showing kids that it's okay to ask questions and think for themselves." There was a strength in her voice that I'd never heard before, a certainty that terrified me. "I'm tired of living a lie. I'm tired of sitting in Kingdom Hall, listening to talks about how terrible the world is when I see good, kind, loving people every single day who aren't witnesses. I'm tired of being told that my non-witness friends are going to die at Armageddon when they're better people than some of the elders I know." Each word was like a knife to my heart. This was my fault somehow. I hadn't taught her well enough, hadn't been a good enough example, hadn't prayed hard enough for her spiritual protection. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed as a mother in the most fundamental way possible. "Jennifer, please, can we meet? Can we study together? Maybe Brother Williams could—" "No, Mom." She cut me off gently but firmly. "I've already talked to Brother Williams. I've talked to Brother Chen. I've read the literature. I've prayed. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. And the answer I keep getting is that this isn't right for me anymore. I need to live my own life, make my own choices, find my own path to whatever truth means for me." The silence stretched between us, filled with 31 years of shared memories that suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. I thought about Jennifer as a little girl, sitting beside me at meetings with her Bible storybook, raising her hand to answer questions about Jonah and the whale. I thought about her baptism at 16, how proud Robert and I had been, how sure we'd felt that our family was secure in Jehovah's protection. "What does this mean?" I asked finally. "For us, I mean. For our relationship." Another pause, longer this time. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "I don't know, Mom. I hope it doesn't have to mean anything. I hope you can love me regardless of what I believe or don't believe. But I know that's not how it works in the organization. I know what the society says about associating with former believers." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of decades of training, of Bible study, of organizational instruction. The rules were clear about maintaining contact with those who'd left the truth. It wasn't about punishment or hatred. It was about maintaining spiritual purity, about not being influenced by those who'd chosen the world over Jehovah. It was about tough love, the kind that sometimes required temporary separation for eternal benefit. But sitting there in my bedroom at midnight, talking to my daughter who sounded like she was saying goodbye, those rules felt impossible to apply. This wasn't some abstract former believer. This was Jennifer. This was the little girl who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, who'd made me Mother's Day cards every year until she was 25, who'd held my hand at Robert's funeral and promised we'd always take care of each other. "I love you," I whispered, and the words felt like both a promise and a betrayal. A promise to her, a betrayal of everything I'd been taught about maintaining boundaries with those who'd rejected the truth. I love you too, Mom. That's why this is so hard. That's why I've been putting off this conversation for months. She took a shaky breath. I'm not asking you to agree with my decision. I'm not asking you to change your beliefs. I'm just asking you to remember that I'm still your daughter, and that my love for you isn't conditional on which church I attend. After we hung up, I sat in my bed for hours, staring at the wall and trying to process what had just happened. 2 of my children, my babies, were pulling away from the faith I'd tried so hard to instill in them. Michael was married to someone who saw my beliefs as toxic, and now Jennifer was walking away entirely. What about David, my oldest? Was he having doubts too? Was my entire family going to crumble because I'd somehow failed in my most important responsibility? The next morning, I called in sick to field service for the first time in over a decade. I couldn't face going door to door, sharing the good news of God's kingdom, when my own family was rejecting that very message. Instead, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that grew cold while I stared out the window at Mrs. Chen hanging laundry on her line. Such a simple, normal activity. Such a peaceful, ordinary morning. How could the world look so unchanged when everything in my life felt like it was falling apart? The doorbell rang around 10, and I almost didn't answer it. I wasn't ready to face concerned friends from the congregation, wasn't prepared to explain why I'd missed field service or lie about everything being fine. But something made me get up, smooth my hair, and walk to the front door. It was Sister Martinez, holding a casserole dish and wearing the kind of gentle, concerned expression that meant she'd heard something. News traveled fast in our congregation. It always had. Someone had probably seen me crying in the Kingdom Hall parking lot after the meeting 2 nights ago, or maybe Brother Williams had mentioned that Jennifer was struggling spiritually. Ruth, dear, I brought you some enchiladas. Maria Martinez had been my friend for over 20 years, had been there through Robert's illness and death, had celebrated with me when each of my children got baptized. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it would be her. I thought you might not feel like cooking today. I let her in, grateful for the company, but also terrified of what she might ask, what I might have to explain. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd faced Sarah's accusations just yesterday morning, and Maria served us both generous portions of the enchiladas she'd brought. These are delicious, I said, though I could barely taste them. Thank you for thinking of me. Maria studied my face with the careful attention of someone who'd known me for decades. Ruth, you look like you haven't slept. Is everything all right with the children? The simple question broke something open inside me. I found myself telling her everything. Sarah's anger, Michael's conflict, Jennifer's late-night phone call, my own crushing sense of failure as a mother and as a witness. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, and with them came tears I'd been holding back for months. Maria listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand when my voice broke. When I finally finished, she sat quietly for a moment, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Oh, Ruth," she said finally, "I had no idea you were carrying all of this alone. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Why didn't you ask for help?" I laughed bitterly, wiping my eyes with the tissue she handed me. What kind of help is there for a mother whose children are rejecting the truth? What kind of help is there when your daughter-in-law thinks your faith is poisonous and your daughter wants to leave the organization entirely? Maria was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands. When she looked up, her expression was troubled. "Ruth, can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone else?" I nodded, grateful for any distraction from my own pain. "Carlos Jr. hasn't been to a meeting in 3 years," she said quietly. "Not since he moved to Phoenix for his job. He sends me pictures of him and his girlfriend. She's not a witness. And they look so happy together. They're planning to get married next year, and they want me to come to the wedding." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "I don't know what to do, Ruth. I don't know how to choose between my faith and my son." I stared at her in shock. Carlos Jr. had been such a good young man, had served as a ministerial servant before he moved away. I'd had no idea he'd stopped attending meetings, had no idea that Maria was facing the same impossible choices I was. "What does Brother Martinez say?" I asked, referring to her husband, who served as an elder in our congregation. "He doesn't know," Maria admitted, and I saw shame flash across her face. "Carlos Jr. calls when his father is at work, emails when he's not home. He knows that if his father finds out, there'll be consequences. Not just for Carlos, but for my husband's position in the congregation. How can I put him in that position? How can I force him to choose between his son and his responsibilities as an elder?" We sat there in my kitchen, two mothers carrying secrets too heavy for words, bound together by a pain we'd never known we shared. For the first time since Sarah's accusation yesterday morning, I didn't feel completely alone. "What are we going to do?" I whispered. Maria reached across the table and took both of my hands in hers. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But maybe we don't have to figure it out alone. Maybe there are other mothers in the congregation who are going through the same thing. Maybe this is more common than we think." The idea was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because it meant I wasn't a complete failure as a mother. If other faithful witness women were facing the same struggles, maybe this was about more than my personal shortcomings. Terrifying because if this was a widespread problem, what did that mean about the organization? What did it mean about the effectiveness of our child-rearing methods? What did it mean about the appeal of the truth to young people who'd been raised in it? As Maria and I talked through the morning, sharing stories and fears we'd kept locked inside for months or even years, I began to see my situation from a different angle. This wasn't just about my personal failure as a mother. This wasn't just about my children's spiritual weakness or Sarah's hostility to the truth. This was about the complex reality of trying to live by absolute principles in a world that was far more nuanced and complicated than our literature sometimes acknowledged. But even as that realization brought some relief from the crushing guilt I'd been carrying, it also raised new and more troubling questions. Questions about loyalty and love, about truth and family, about whether faith was meant to bring people together or drive them apart. Questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer, but that seemed to be demanding my attention whether I wanted to face them or not. The afternoon sun was slanting through my kitchen windows when Maria finally left, promising to call me later in the week, promising that we'd figure this out together somehow. I watched her walk down my front path, her shoulders straight despite the weight of the secrets she carried, and I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone with my pain. But I also felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss I couldn't see the bottom of. The safe, certain world I'd inhabited for 47 years was starting to feel less solid, less absolute. And I wasn't sure whether what was waiting below was freedom or destruction. 3 weeks after my conversation with Maria, everything changed in a way I never could have predicted. I was coming home from the Thursday evening meeting, my mind still processing Brother Thompson's talk about maintaining family unity, when I saw the ambulance pulling away from Sarah and Michael's house. My heart stopped. Emma. Something had happened to Emma. I drove up their driveway faster than I should have, my hands shaking as I parked behind Michael's car. The front door was open, and I could see neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, their faces etched with concern. Mrs. Patterson from next door saw me getting out of my car and hurried over. "Ruth, thank goodness you're here," she said, grabbing my arm. "It's Sarah. She was hit by a drunk driver on her way home from work. Michael's at the hospital with her now." The world tilted sideways. Sarah, not Emma. Sarah was hurt, possibly seriously hurt, and despite everything that had passed between us, despite all the harsh words and accusations, all I could think about was Michael's face when he'd lost his father. All I could think about was little Emma losing her mother. "How bad?" I managed to ask. Mrs. Patterson's expression was grim. "Bad enough that they wouldn't let Emma ride in the ambulance. She's inside with Michael's friend Tom, but she keeps asking for her grandmother. She keeps asking for you." I didn't hesitate. Whatever had happened between Sarah and me, whatever walls we'd built, whatever principles I thought I needed to uphold, none of that mattered now. A 3-year-old needed her grandmother, and I was going to be there. Emma launched herself into my arms the moment I walked through the door, her small body shaking with sobs. Grandma Ruth, Mommy got hurt. Daddy went to the hospital, but I can't go. I want Mommy. I held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling her tiny heart beating against my chest like a frightened bird. I know, sweetheart, I know you're scared, but Daddy's with Mommy and the doctors are going to take very good care of her, okay? Tom, a colleague of Michael's from the engineering firm, looked relieved to see me. Michael said he'd call as soon as he knew anything. The paramedics said she was conscious when they loaded her into the ambulance, but he shrugged helplessly. You know how these things are. I did know. I'd sat in hospital waiting rooms before, had held my breath while doctors delivered news that would change everything. I'd buried a husband and watched friends lose children and learned that life could pivot on a single moment, a single phone call, a single drunk driver running a red light. Go home to your family, I told Tom. I'll stay with Emma. After he left, I carried Emma to the couch and settled her in my lap, smoothing her hair and humming the lullabies I'd sung to her father when he was small. Gradually, her sobs subsided into hiccups, then into the deep, shuddering breaths of exhaustion. Grandma Ruth, she said in a small voice, is Mommy going to die like Grandpa Robert did? The question pierced my heart. Emma had been barely 2 when Robert passed, but she remembered him, remembered the funeral, remembered the tears, and the sadness that had hung over our family for months afterward. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly, because lying to children about serious things had never felt right to me, regardless of what anyone else might think was appropriate. But the doctors are very smart, and they're going to do everything they can to help Mommy get better. She was quiet for a moment, processing this in the way children do, with a gravity that seems too heavy for such small shoulders. Will you stay with me until Daddy comes home? Of course I will, I promised, and I meant it completely. Whatever else happened, whatever conversations needed to be had about faith and family and forgiveness, Emma would not face this night alone. The hours crawled by. I made Emma her favorite grilled cheese sandwich, though she only picked at it. I read her 3 stories from the picture books scattered around the living room, books I'd never seen before because I'd always brought my own when I visited, Bible story books and publications from the society. Tonight, I read about curious monkeys and runaway bunnies and brave little engines that could, and I found myself wondering when I'd stopped seeing the value in stories that were simply about imagination and hope, rather than instruction and doctrine. Around midnight, Michael finally called. His voice was thick with exhaustion and relief. She's going to be okay, Mom. Broken ribs, a concussion, her left arm is fractured, but she's going to be okay. They want to keep her for observation tonight, but the doctor thinks she can come home tomorrow afternoon. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer of gratitude. Thank God. How are you holding up? I don't know. Scared, I guess. When I saw her car, his voice broke slightly. Mom, I keep thinking about what we said to you the other day, about limiting Emma's time with you, about your faith being harmful. And then tonight, when I needed someone to take care of my daughter, you were the first person I thought to call. I felt tears prick my eyes. Michael, you don't need to. No, I do need to say this. Sarah was wrong. I was wrong. Not about everything, maybe, but about some things. About you. About what kind of grandmother you are, what kind of person you are. He paused, and I could hear hospital sounds in the background. Beeping machines, quiet conversations, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum floors. Can you stay with Emma tomorrow while I bring Sarah home? I know it's a lot to ask after everything that's happened, but of course, I said without hesitation. Michael, you never have to ask. She's my granddaughter. You're my son. I'll be here as long as you need me. The next morning, Emma and I made pancakes together, standing on a chair so she could reach the counter, flour in her hair and batter on her pajamas. She was still subdued, still asking worried questions about her mother. But there was something peaceful about the domestic routine, something healing about this simple act of caring for each other. Grandma Ruth, she said, as I flipped a pancake, are you going to stop talking to Daddy like Tommy's daddy stopped talking to Tommy? I nearly dropped the spatula. This was the conversation Sarah had been worried about, the seeds of fear that I'd supposedly planted in Emma's mind. But looking at her now, her serious brown eyes so much like Michael's, I realized that the fear wasn't about doctrine or disfellowshipping or organizational policy. The fear was about love. The fear was about abandonment. The fear was about families being torn apart for reasons children couldn't understand. I turned off the burner and knelt down so I was at Emma's eye level. Emma, sweetheart, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I will never, ever stop talking to your daddy. I will never stop loving him, and I will never stop loving you no matter what. Do you understand? She nodded solemnly. Even if he doesn't go to the special building with you? Even if he doesn't go to the special building with me, I confirmed. Even if he believes different things than I believe. Even if he makes choices I don't agree with. He's my son, and you're my granddaughter, and nothing will ever change that. As I said the words, I felt something shift inside me, something fundamental and irreversible. I was making a choice, consciously and deliberately, to prioritize love over doctrine, family over organization, grace over judgment. It should have felt like betrayal, like spiritual compromise, like the kind of weakness the society warned against. Instead, it felt like coming home to myself. Michael arrived that afternoon with Sarah in a wheelchair, her left arm in a cast and her face still pale with pain and medication. She looked fragile in a way I'd never seen before, vulnerable and scared and very young despite her 30 years. When she saw me coming down the front steps to help, her eyes filled with tears. "Ruth," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about what I said the other day. I'm sorry about trying to keep you away from Emma. I'm sorry about—" "Shh," I said, taking her uninjured hand in mine. "None of that matters now. You're hurt, and you're home, and that's all that matters." But Sarah shook her head, wincing at the movement. "It does matter. I was scared, and I said terrible things. I was scared that you'd teach Emma to judge me, to see me as less than, to think I was going to hell because I don't believe what you believe." Tears were streaming down her face now. And then last night, when I was lying in that hospital bed thinking I might die, thinking Emma might grow up without her mother, all I could think about was how grateful I was that you were taking care of her. How grateful I was that she had a grandmother who loved her enough to drop everything and be there when she needed you. I helped Michael get Sarah settled on the couch, surrounded by pillows and blankets, with Emma curled up carefully beside her, talking a mile a minute about the pancakes we'd made and the stories we'd read. Watching them together, seeing the relief and love on both their faces, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months. That evening, after Sarah had fallen asleep and Emma was tucked into bed, Michael and I sat at his kitchen table with cups of coffee, talking in the quiet way we used to when he was a teenager and would stay up late sharing his thoughts and dreams. "Mom," he said finally, "I need to tell you something. I haven't been completely honest with you about my faith, about what I believe." I looked at him across the table. This man who had been my baby, my youngest, my last hope for a family united in the truth. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I stopped believing a long time ago. Not in God, necessarily, but in the organization, in the idea that there's only one right way to worship, one right way to live, one right way to love." He met my eyes, and I saw both sadness and resolve there. "I've been going through the motions for years because I didn't want to hurt you, didn't want to be another child who disappointed you. But sitting in that hospital last night, thinking about what really matters, thinking about what kind of father I want to be, I can't keep pretending anymore." The words should have devastated me. A week ago they would have. But sitting there in his kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the life he'd built, photos of Emma on the refrigerator, Sarah's medical books stacked on the counter, drawings from Emma's daycare magneted to the freezer door, I found myself seeing him not as a wayward son who'd lost his faith, but as a man who'd found his own path to love and meaning and purpose. "Are you happy?" I asked him. The question seemed to surprise him. Am I happy? Yes. In your life, in your marriage, in your role as a father. Are you happy? He considered this seriously, the way he'd always considered important questions, even as a child. "Yes," he said finally. "I am. Even with all the conflict, even with the worry about disappointing you, Yes, I'm happy. I nodded slowly. Then maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what God wants for His children. Not perfect adherence to rules and regulations, but happiness and love and the courage to build something good in the world. We talked until nearly 2 a.m. about faith and doubt, about family and forgiveness, about the difference between religion and spirituality. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. And when I finally drove home through the empty streets, I felt lighter than I had in months. The next Sunday, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Instead of going to the Kingdom Hall, I drove to Michael and Sarah's house. I found them in the backyard, Sarah reading in a lawn chair, while Michael pushed Emma on the swing set he'd built last summer. "Grandma Ruth!" Emma squealed, running to me with her arms outstretched. "Look how high I can swing!" I spent the morning with them, playing with Emma, helping Sarah with lunch, despite her protests that she could manage with one arm, listening to Michael talk about his work on a new bridge design that would connect 2 sides of the city that had been separated for decades. As I was leaving that afternoon, Sarah walked me to my car, moving slowly, but insisting she felt well enough to be up and around. "Ruth," she said, "I want you to know that I understand now. I understand why your faith is important to you, why it's been the center of your life for so long. I was wrong to call it harmful or toxic. It's not the faith that's the problem. It's when faith becomes more important than the people we're supposed to love." I nodded, thinking about the conversations I'd had with Maria Martinez, the secrets we'd shared, the pain we'd carried alone for so long. "I'm learning that too," I said. "I'm learning that maybe the most faithful thing I can do is choose love over doctrine, choose family over organization, choose grace over judgment." "Does that mean you're leaving your church?" she asked, and I could hear genuine concern in her voice, not triumph or vindication. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I don't know what it means for my relationship with the congregation, with the friends I've had for decades, with the structure that's defined my life for 47 years. But I know what it means for my relationship with my family. It means I choose you, all of you, whatever that costs me." As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about the courage it takes to change course after nearly 7 decades of life. The humility required to admit that perhaps you've been wrong about some things. The faith it takes to step into uncertainty when certainty has been your anchor for so long. I thought about Emma and the kind of grandmother I wanted to be for her. Not one who taught her to fear differences or judge those who believed differently, but one who showed her that love could be bigger than doctrine, that family could be stronger than ideology, that grace could overcome any division. The road ahead was unclear. There would be consequences for my choices, difficult conversations with elders and friends, possible shunning from the community that had been my spiritual home for nearly 5 decades. But for the first time in months, I felt peace. For the first time in years, I felt free. That night, I called Jennifer and told her I loved her unconditionally, regardless of her spiritual choices. I called David, my oldest, and asked him honestly about his own struggles with faith, promising to listen without judgment. I even called Maria Martinez and asked if she wanted to have coffee, if she wanted to talk about creating a support group for mothers facing similar challenges. The conversation with Maria was the most hopeful I'd had in months. It turned out there were more of us than we'd imagined, mothers and fathers and grandparents who were choosing love over doctrine, who were finding ways to maintain their faith while refusing to abandon their families. We weren't leaving God. We were expanding our understanding of what it meant to follow Him. 3 months later, I watched Emma blow out the candles on her 4th birthday cake, surrounded by family and friends from many different backgrounds and beliefs. Sarah had invited neighbors, colleagues, friends from Emma's daycare, and yes, me. We sang happy birthday together, shared cake and laughter, told stories, and made memories that had nothing to do with doctrine or denomination or spiritual status. Standing in that living room, watching my granddaughter's face light up with joy, I realized that this was what faith was supposed to look like. Not the rigid adherence to rules that divided families, but the radical choice to love without conditions, to build bridges instead of walls, to create spaces where everyone belonged. I was still a woman of faith. I still believed in God, still prayed, still found comfort and guidance in spiritual practices. But my faith had evolved, had grown beyond the boundaries that once seemed so essential. It had become bigger, more inclusive, more grace-filled. It had become worthy of the love I felt for my family. And for the first time in decades, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything.